This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China's Vice Premier and top trade negotiator calling to reduce misunderstandings and boost cooperation with the US after both sides agree on a framework to extend a tariff truce. Next step, presidential approval on both sides. Now, Taiwan accuses China of expansionism after two of the country's aircraft carriers patrolled the Pacific together for the first time. The island calling it a clear political message. South Korea has stopped its loudspeaker broadcasts into the north, a move aimed at restoring trust and pushing for peace on the peninsula. Chinese automakers promised to adhere to a standardised payment period after outcry from suppliers who have been hurting from an intense price war. Also in East Asia tonight, what's with the Labubu frenzy? A human-sized figure has just sold for $150,000. We'll take a deep dive into the phenomenon and what it means for its Chinese makers. China says that talks with the U.S. in London this week have made new progress after senior officials agreed on a framework to implement a trade truce. Now, this extends the deal they reached last month in Geneva. A Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, according to state media, said both sides should enhance consensus and maintain communication, adding that officials had what he describes as candid and in-depth trade negotiations in London. Mr. He also urged Beijing and Washington to safeguard the hard-won outcome from the talks and work towards fostering stable and long-term bilateral trade ties. Delegations will now take the proposal back to their respective leaders for approvals. Chinese Vice Commerce Minister Li Chenggang said that he hoped that talks in London can be conducive for enhancing trust. Neither Beijing nor Washington have disclosed any specifics of the deal. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick expressed hope that the preliminary agreement could help resolve a key point of friction, rare earths. Mr. Lutnick also indicated that both agreed to roll back export controls on goods and technologies that are crucial to the other.
We do absolutely expect that the topic of rare earth minerals and magnets with respect to the United States of America will be resolved in this framework implementation. That is a fundamental part of that. Also, there were a number of measures the United States of America put on when those rare earths were not coming. You should expect those to come off.
The shares in East Asia, in the meantime, ended higher on optimism over progress in those U.S.-China trade talks. Greater China markets finished in the green, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng touched its strongest level since late March. Now, stocks in Chinese rare mineral suppliers extending their gains. The CSI Rare Earth Index gained more than 3%. JL Mag Rare Earth, a major winner after securing export licenses to regions including the US, Europe and Southeast Asia. Shares of the rare earths magnet producer 8% higher. Its peer, Innovo Technology, had also said that it was granted licenses but did not mention where the customers were based. The cheer also seen elsewhere in East Asia. Japan's Nikkei and Topix ended in the green, while South Korea's Kospi finished above the 2,900 mark. That's for the first time in more than 3 years. Right, for more on this, we are joined by CNA's Tan Si-hui in Beijing, who has been tracking very closely these trade talks. Si-hui, the proposed framework apparently still awaiting approval from the two leaders. Are there any sticking points that remain?
Well, let's start first with the latest lines that came from the Chinese side. They say that both sides have reached new progress on these trade talks, and they urge the U.S. to honor its commitments once this consensus has been made. It also reiterated the fact that the trade war produces no winners. China does not seek conflict, but it is not intimidated by one. Now, when we look at the framework, there are scant details in the framework, including when the timeline is, when the framework will be implemented. But at the same time, economists saying that due to the urgency of this, We should see the details coming out very soon. As we know, China dominates the majority of the global supply of rare earths, while the U.S. virtually manufactures and produces none of that. And when we know that the manufacturing of automation industries, defense industries may come to a grinding halt, the details of these framework will be very urgent. And we saw that in how fast the negotiations were made in just 2 days over the last 2 days. And you've heard earlier, the U.S. seems to be very optimistic about these talks. But as I spoke to one economist, he says that he is a little wary about how this framework would turn out, citing what happened in May 2018 when tariffs were reinstated following a brief truce.
More often than not, it is non-binding, and the two sides may, let's say, turn their back against each other anytime. So that with that in mind, I don't think that the framework agreement will resolve a lot of problems other than hitting a truce in some areas.
Beyond export control measures, it is also unclear about what other issues were being discussed upon. We don't know about market access, trade balance, even topics such as fentanyl control, whether these were being talked about. So analysts are calling for more actionable outcomes in further talks.
So I hear the caution there because the framework is basically non-binding. But, say what you like, the talks in London appear to signal some kind of a thawing of trade tensions. What can we expect from the Chinese side?
So the majority of the framework, we could see the focus on export control measures. So the Chinese side, they could possibly relax controls on rare earth minerals, and in exchange, we could see the U.S. possibly relaxing restrictions on chip design software, as well as restrictions on Huawei chips. And according to U.S. President Donald Trump, he said that these could come off in a balanced way. But even so, analysts believe the U.S. might have learned lessons about imposing sanctions against China, but at the same time, they are not so optimistic about this, saying that this is just a temporary truce, as there are still long-standing trade differences between the U.S. and China, as we've seen both sides accusing each other of violating the Geneva Agreement involving non-trade issues such as revoking Chinese student visas. And we also are expecting that certain export control measures are not going to be lifted anytime soon, such as those of more advanced NVIDIA chips.
All right, we hear you there. Thank you so very much for that report. CNA's Tan Sihui in Beijing. A U.S. federal appeals court is allowing President Donald Trump's global tariffs to remain in effect for now, while it reviews a lower court decision blocking the levies on grounds that Mr. Trump had exceeded his authority. Now, the decision means the president may continue to enforce his Liberation Day tariffs on imports from most U.S. trading partners, as well as a separate set of duties imposed on Canada, China, and Mexico. Arguments for the case have been scheduled for end July. Meanwhile, 5 nations in the EU, as well as airlines and aerospace firms worldwide, are urging Mr. Trump not to impose new national security tariffs on imported commercial planes and parts. Canada, China, and Japan, they're among the countries that have expressed concern over the fallout of possible new levies. Separately, U.S. plane maker Boeing cited a recent trade deal announced in May with Britain that ensures tariff-free treatment for airplanes and parts. Taiwan has accused China of harboring expansionist aims after Japan spotted 2 Chinese aircraft carriers operating simultaneously in the Pacific for the first time. Defense Minister Wellington Koo says that China had a full grasp of the carriers' movements and that crossing from the first island chain into the second sends a political message. The first island chain refers to the area that runs from Japan to Taiwan and includes the Philippines and Borneo. The second chain spreads further out into the Pacific to include places like the U.S. territory of Guam. One of the aircraft carriers, Shandong, sailed inside the waters surrounding Okinotori, and it was accompanied by 4 other vessels, as well as fighter jets and helicopters. Shandong sailed through the waters on Saturday. And around the same time, another carrier, Liaoning, and its fleet also entered Japan's exclusive economic zone near Minami Torishima, a remote island east of Iwo Tokyo has also criticized Beijing's heightened naval activities and warned that these should not threaten Japan's safety. Tokyo has pledged to continue monitoring the Chinese operations closely. Well, China has dismissed Japan's concerns, arguing that the carriers were carrying out routine training and complied with international law. Since May, Beijing has been observed to be sending an unusually large number of naval and Coast Guard vessels through East Asian waters. Hong Kong has banned downloads of a mobile game application named Reversed Front Bonfire, saying that it threatens national security. Police say the app was released under the guise of a game, but is seeking to promote cessationist agendas like promoting independence for Hong Kong and Taiwan. Now, Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China under the principle of one country, two systems, and Beijing considers self-ruled Taiwan a part of Chinese territory. The Hong Kong police also accuses the game of advocating armed revolution and the overthrowing of China's system. In a statement, police says anyone who downloads, shares, or recommends the app may be committing the offense of incitement to secession. Those who possess the mobile app may also be breaking the national security law by having a publication that has seditious intent. Payment made via the in-app purchase is also an offense, and it is seen as providing funding to the relevant developer. The police has asked those who have downloaded the app to uninstall it immediately. It's not possible to download the app now on Apple Store or Google Play. But a quick Google search on internet shows that you can still access the application's website and read what the game is all about. Beijing imposed the national security law back in 2020, while Hong Kong passed its own national security law last year, which criminalizes acts of treason, sedition, and theft of state secrets. The national security law in Hong Kong also allows for trials to be held behind closed doors. Just last month, the city expanded the coverage of that law to include, for example, designating premises under China's National Security Office in Hong Kong as prohibited places. While staying in Hong Kong, the way the English language is taught in primary schools is set to change. The city's Education Bureau has released a new guide telling schools to strengthen patriotic and national security education. It says that in addition to language skills, values education will foster the students' overall development and help them become good nationals. Since Hong Kong's social unrest in 2019, authorities have introduced national security education to boost patriotism. According to the South China Morning Post, the previous edition of the guide suggested that English teachers let pupils explore human rights and equal opportunities, but these issues have been dropped and are replaced by topics such as respect for others, animal rights, and the protection of the environment. Coming up next on East Asia tonight, the French Senate takes aim at the fast fashion industry, with firms like Chinese e-commerce firm Shein in its sights, in a bill that sanctions companies and bans advertisements. Plus, Nintendo Switch 2 smashes records to become the fastest-selling console ever. Hello again, you're watching East Asia Tonight, and it is now time for business news with Roland Lim. So, Roland, automakers in China, they're making good on their promises when it comes to payment?
Right, you are. You have heard correctly. Chinese automakers have pledged to ensure timely payments following an outcry from steel suppliers over long settlement periods. Major industry players, BYD and Chery, state-owned firms, Dongfeng Guangzhou Auto, as well as China FAW, as well as small players, XPeng, Xiaomi, all have promised to adhere to a standardized 60-day repayment period. The standardized timeline is part of new rules issued by Chinese authorities in March to cushion small and medium-sized enterprises from a brutal price war. They came into effect the start of this month. But suppliers have been worried about possible loopholes. The China Iron and Steel Association, which represents many of China's biggest mills, issued a statement saying that firms have been struggling to operate due to fierce competition among automakers. It pointed out that some car manufacturers have been asking for price cuts of more than 10% and delaying payments for months, which have left some suppliers with low profits and limited liquidity. The association has urged Chinese automakers to learn from the healthy relationships that their Chinese peers have with suppliers. Chinese car manufacturers have been under increasing government scrutiny as effects of a price war rippled beyond the sector. The industry ministry summoned automakers last week and ordered them to end the excessive competition. Reports have shown that the extended payment cycles of China's auto sector far outstrips industry norms. Bloomberg data revealed that BYD took an average of 275 days to pay suppliers in 2023. Broadly, Chinese firms have reported a concerning increase in ultra-long payment delays. It's a similar pattern seen playing out among companies in Asia as well. A survey by global trade creditor insurer Coface found that 49% of Chinese firms surveyed reported that payment lapses of more than 180 days on fees that exceeded 2% of their annual turnover in 2024. Now, that's up sharply from the 33% seen a year earlier. Region-wide, the figure jumps to a new high of 40% from 23% in 23. China ranked number 3 among the nations that reported the biggest increase. The second spot went to Thailand, while India took the first position. All sectors saw increases, with the most notable was in wood, agro-food and automobile. Looking ahead, surveyed firms have anticipated payment behavior to worsen due to the uncertain economic environment. South Korea has logged its sharpest on-month gain in household loans in 9 months for the month of May, spurred by a rise in property transactions. This a cause for concern for the central bank and regulators as they seek to balance between supporting the economy and managing the nation's growing debt. Household borrowing from banks stood at some $845 billion last month, and that's up close to $4 billion from the month earlier, largely driven by the rise in mortgages. And that's due to a surge in housing transactions following the relaxing of household lending regulations earlier this year, as well as Seoul's partial lifting of its land transaction rules. The city's government has since reinstated the rules in the wake of escalating property prices. Other types of loans also grew as seasonal demand during holidays and family-related spending picked up. The Financial Services Commission has announced plans to tighten monitoring of mortgages. The Bank of Korea, meanwhile, in a dilemma on ways to help a sputtering economy which shrank in the first quarter of this year. While lowering interest rates is on the cards to support the nation amid U.S. trade measures, the ballooning household debt feeds into caution on further rate cuts. Staying in South Korea, labor unions are calling for a close to 15% increase of next year's minimum hourly wage. Now it's proposing for pay hikes of some 11,500 won, that's slightly above $8. This is the first figure requested by labor groups as the Minimum Wage Commission begins deliberations. Business groups have yet to submit their demands, but they cite the impact of U.S. tariffs and the past few months of domestic political unrest, setting a tone for a likely freeze or marginal increase in hourly wages. The country's antitrust watchdog has fined Temu for misleading consumers through deceptive advertisements in a first such regulatory sanction imposed on e-commerce platforms. The Fair Trade Commission says it has imposed a fine of some $260,000 on Temu for violating laws on fair advertising. The FTC claims that the Chinese retailer advertised that users could easily receive cash equivalent points by engaging in a roulette-style game. But users had to fulfill many more tasks, such as inviting multiple friends, in order to receive their rewards. French senators have passed a bill targeting the fast fashion industry, notably Chinese e-commerce firm Shein. The law seeks to clamp down on retailers from flooding the market with cheap and easily disposable clothing. The proposal includes sanctions against companies and bans fast fashion ads. Russ Cullen reports with more from Paris.
This legislation seeks to reduce the environmental impacts of the textile industry and reduce overconsumption. According to the French government's Environment Agency, some 48 pieces of clothing per person are released into the French market every year. There are penalties and sanctions included in this bill, which can be applied if retailers fall foul of the new legislation. And there's also an attempt to limit the reach of influencers promoting fast fashion products online. Now, in the Senate, this bill was subject to many amendments, including an attempt to exclude European retailers such as H&M from Sweden and Zara from Spain from having new taxes applied to them. That was seen as something which was more targeting big Asian retailers like the Chinese fast fashion giant Shein, and a spokesperson for Shein in France said that this was anti-Shein legislation targeting Shein's customers, which would only impact the purchasing power of the French public, because those taxes, if they are applied, can be up to €50 per item if that item comes from a retailer which is contravening the new legislation. European retailers would still have to outline to their customers the environmental impact of the piece of clothing that they are buying. Now, the French government does not have a majority in Parliament, and some of Emmanuel Macron's MPs recently have been regretting that they haven't been able to pass as much legislation as they would have liked. However, this bill does have broad political party support. It sailed through the lower house of Parliament last spring. Now it's cleared the Senate. The next stage would be to go before a joint committee of senators and MPs in the autumn, and then it can go to Emmanuel Macron for presidential assent. Ross Cullen, CNA, Paris.
Nintendo's Switch 2 console has smashed records to become the fastest-selling console ever. Gamers snapped up 3.5 million units in just 4 days alone after the console's release, breaking the record set by the first Switch console and Sony PlayStation 5. The Japanese firm is aiming to sell some 50 million units by March next year, but analysts have flagged that it may be difficult for Nintendo to sustain the momentum. The Switch 2 is priced higher than its predecessor and was released at a time of growing weakness in the global economy. Nintendo has also warned that it may have to raise prices depending on US President Trump's tariffs measures. Now, businesses are being encouraged to take advantage of a rail sea transport route linking Western China and Southeast Asia. The new international land-sea trade corridor saves shipping time and reduces costs. The transport corridor comes under the China-Singapore-Chongqing Connectivity Initiative, or CCI. This year marks the 10th anniversary of the CCI. Now, at a trade and financial conference, Senior Minister of State for Digital Development and Information, Tan Kiat Hao, notes how the corridor has helped increase container volumes by nearly tenfold since 2019. The trade corridor, or the ILSTC, connects Chongqing to Qinzhou in Guangxi province by rail, and from Qinzhou to Singapore and beyond by sea.
With regional agreements and the recently upgraded ASEAN-China Free Trade Area, trade between ASEAN and China will continue to flourish, representing more promising opportunities for trade and cross-border financing along the CCI-ILSTC. Making full use of these opportunities requires partnerships across borders, sectors, and disciplines.
我们热忱欢迎新加坡的物流贸易企业、金融机构深度参与陆海新通道建设，发挥自身优势，与重庆及沿线各方携手打造更加高效、便捷、开放的国际物流和贸易通道。同时，我们也期待与东盟国家的机构和企业加强合作，共同分享陆海新通道带来的发展机遇，实现共同发展。
That's the latest in business. For now, we'll tell you.
Oh, thanks so very much for that, Roland. We are going to go for a break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, a move to restore trust. South Korea stops its loudspeaker propaganda broadcasts aimed at the north. You're watching East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. South Korea has stopped its loudspeaker broadcasts into the north, a move aimed at restoring trust and pushing for peace on the Korean Peninsula. Taiwan accuses China of expansionism after 2 aircraft carriers patrolled the Pacific together for the first time, calling it a clear political message. And China's top trade negotiator calling to reduce misunderstandings and boost cooperation with the U.S. after both sides agreed on a framework to extend a tariff truce. Next step, presidential approval on both sides. And earlier, CNA's Paul Sung spoke with Deborah Elms, head of trade policy at Enrich Foundation, and he began by asking her about the significance of the trade framework.
It's better than having someone storm out of the meeting, yeah. But it's unclear what has been agreed to besides a sort of pathway to a framework to implement a concept of a plan. So, it's early days. This is going to take some time. But I suppose that the good news is that both sides do seem to see that escalation is not in their interest. And they agree that negotiations or discussions are important pathways to get to some kind of resolution. Beyond that, though, it gets complicated, right? What are we trying to accomplish? Who's going to move on what timelines over what issues is still evolving.
Commerce Secretary Lutnick says that it should resolve the sticking point of rare earth. Is this a good sign that a deal could be on the card soon?
I suppose it could be. I would discount most of what Lutnick says because it's rarely accurate. But if he thinks it's important, obviously rare earths do matter, magnets do matter. I think both sides have identified that they have some cards to play in this dispute, and both have shown a willingness to use those if the negotiations start to unravel. If they can stop an escalation of tensions, I think that's great news. And we'll have to wait and see if we get any more details about what exactly did the two sides agree. Did the U.S. agree to withdraw some of its restrictions on tech, especially semiconductor high-tech equipment transfers? And what did China agree to do on critical minerals and magnets? We'll wait for the details on these.
Now, we're waiting for the details from this juncture, though. What are the biggest challenges ahead that could possibly derail the framework from turning into a full-fledged deal?
It could be any one of 1,000 things. Part of the problem is that we started off with a fairly straightforward discussion on tariffs, where the two sides had rapidly escalated tariffs to an unsustainable level. But the tariff discussion is only a small piece of what is now on the agenda. It includes things, as you mentioned, like rare earths, critical minerals, magnets, semiconductor and other high-tech export restrictions, export controls in general, investment curbs, visa issues. There's a whole lot of things that you could put on the negotiating cards for both sides. All of them are difficult. All of them require compromise from both sides. Neither side, neither Trump nor Xi, I think, is in the mood to compromise. And so I think there are lots of things that could go horribly wrong in these discussions unless they keep to the sort of bedrock principle that we do not want to have an escalation of tension going forward.
Now, seeing the concerted effort on both sides in agreeing on this framework, are you seeing a shift in U.S.-China relations as a result of these talks in London?
I think it's too early to say. I think what is encouraging is that we've now had many hours of discussions with both sides. I think talking is always better than not talking, but the fact that it's proving difficult to get clear outcomes is a worry. The fact that both sides have to fly back to their leaders to present whatever was discussed in person to their leaders in 2025 tells you something about the negotiating leverage that the teams had on the ground. In other words, they weren't authorized ahead of time to accept an agreement. They have to go back in person to the Oval Office, to Beijing, and to present this information and then get the approval, perhaps, to move ahead. I think that it shows you how complicated these talks will ultimately be.
South Korea's military says it has suspended loudspeaker broadcasts aimed at the north as part of the state's efforts to soften relations with its neighbor. A defense ministry official today said it received orders to halt those broadcasts. It had run for almost a year since last July as a response to Pyongyang's launch of trash balloons across the border into the south. Now, this is seen as part of a move by newly elected President Lee Jae-myung to fulfill a pledge to restore trust in inter-Korea relations and peace within the peninsula, and also in the hopes that the North would reciprocate by stopping what has been described as strange and unsettling noises towards the South. Inter-Korean ties under former President Moon Jae-in had been cordial, with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un even thanking Mr. Moon for trying to improve relations when the South Korean leader stepped down. The ties between the two sides dramatically worsened under ousted President Yoon Suk-yeol, who took on a more hawkish approach, emphasizing on military deterrence with allies US and Japan. Japan is releasing more rice from its stockpiles into the domestic market to deal with shortages and soaring prices. While these measures have public support, some have raised concerns about a potential shortfall in case of emergencies. The latest plans to release another 200,000 tons of rice will leave reserves at just 10% of the usual volume. CNA's Michio Ishida tells us more.
This supermarket in Kagogawa City in Hyogo Prefecture sold rice from government stockpiles, or reserved rice, for the first time last Wednesday. Long queues formed as local residents waited for their turn to buy the rice, which was from the 2021 and 2022 harvest. A 5-kilogram pack was sold at slightly more than 2,100 yen, or some $15, about half the average retail price. Agriculture Minister Shinjiro Koizumi, the son of popular former Prime Minister, has pushed reserved rice into the market since he took office last month, selling it directly through contracts with retailers instead of the highest bidders at government auctions. This has won him public support, translating into improved approval ratings for Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's cabinet ahead of an upper house election in July. The government began stockpiling rice in 1995 as a means to stabilize market prices, following a serious shortage in 1993 that sparked panic buying. On average, it stockpiles 1 million tons of rice in case of emergencies such as disasters or crop failures. But plans to release an additional 200,000 tons of rice announced on Tuesday means there is only about 100,000 tons left in government reserves. Mr. Koizumi dismissed concerns from the media and a coalition partner, pointing out that only about 40,000 tons of rice was released during the devastating Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in 2011. According to latest government data, the average retail price of rice dropped for the second week in a row to 4,223 yen, or about $29 for 5 kilograms. But that's still about twice as much compared to the same period last year. Michio Ishida, CNA, Hyogo, Japan.
Now, some news from media outlets in East Asia. Taiwan's population fell last month to some 23,355,000 in April. That's the 17th consecutive month of decline. Taipei Times says about 8,400 babies were born last month. That's a historic low figure. The Yomiuri Shimbun says rumors circulating in Hong Kong that a massive earthquake will strike Japan in July have prompted many travelers to postpone visits. The rumor has its roots in a 1999 manga which predicted a major catastrophe in March 2011 when Japan suffered a magnitude 9 quake. A passage says the real catastrophe will come in July 2025. China is rolling out extended marriage leave in at least 27 regions to foster a more family-friendly society. Newlyweds are granted 3 days of leave at the national level. A Global Times says Shandong province has extended that to 18 days, and Sichuan is planning to go all the way up to 20 days. And for more updates from East Asia, do log on to CNA.Asia or our mobile app. Turning to the U.S. now. California Governor Gavin Newsom raising the stakes in his war of words against President Donald Trump. He's called on Americans to stand up to the leader, warning that democracy is under assault. In a video statement, Mr. Newsom criticized Mr. Trump for deploying those troops to L.A. to quell immigration protests, which have dragged on for a 5th day.
Some of us could be snatched off the streets without a warrant, based only on suspicion or skin color. Then none of us are safe. Authoritarian regimes begin by targeting people who are least able to defend themselves, but they do not stop there. Trump and his loyalists, they thrive on division because it allows them to take more power and exert even more control. And by the way, Trump, he's not opposed to lawlessness and violence as long as it serves him. What more evidence do we need than January 6th?
Governor Newsom is challenging the troop deployment in court, with the judge saying he will hear the case tomorrow. He wants the National Guard troops and Marines withdrawn, saying that their deployment is unlawful. The sending of troops is significant as it was done unilaterally by the president. Though there have been demonstrations of various sizes, most have largely been peaceful. But criminals have been taking advantage of the chaos to loot and vandalize. Now, that's prompted the city's mayor to impose a curfew in downtown LA from 8 p.m. local time till 6 the next morning. Police say arresting protesters defy the curfew.
Let me just say that a curfew has been in consideration for several days, but clearly after the violence that took place last night, 23 businesses looted, and just the extensive, widespread nature of the vandalism, we reached a tipping point and declared a state of emergency and called for the curfew.
Meantime, President Trump says he is mulling invoking the Insurrection Act of 1807 to give the military greater powers to quell any unrest. This, as Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth defended the deployment of troops, saying that they are there to safeguard immigration and customs enforcement officers conducting raids. The president defined just how long he expects the National Guard and Marines to stay.
Until there's no danger. It's easy. Look, it's common sense. You ask me that question. When there's no danger, they'll leave. You would have had a horrible situation had I not sent them in. Horrible. You'd be reporting on a lot of death and a lot of destruction that's not going to take place.
Tony Waterman, speaking with us from within the curfew zone, tells us who Governor Newsom was addressing in his message and what he hopes to achieve.
I think that the main person he was messaging was the President of the United States, with which he's been engaged in this war of words for days now. But he's also speaking to people on the ground here, the protesters, asking them to not be violent, to keep things peaceful. And he was also speaking to Americans across the country, saying that what is happening here in Los Angeles is going to affect everyone. And certainly we have seen these demonstrations really spreading from coast to coast, with massive protests taking place right now in New York City and Chicago, in other cities across the U.S. So they're coming out to the streets now under the pretext that what is happening here in Los Angeles, this militarization of this city with the 4,000 National Guards troops, the 700 active duty Marines, is something that could be in the future of these other cities across the U.S. as well. And the president did say today from the Oval Office that if there are demonstrations as we head into this weekend, when he is hosting this massive military parade in Washington, that those protesters will be met, in his words, with force.
Coming up next on East Asia tonight, a human-sized Labubu doll went for more than $100,000 at a Beijing auction. What's driving this craze? The details next. And look who's back from military service. The BTS reunion fever edging higher by the day. So get this, a human-sized Labubu figure has just sold for $150,000 at an auction in Beijing, setting a new record for the toy. Now, this mint green Labubu is about 130 centimeters tall and said to be the only one in the world. Labubu is a creation of Hong Kong-born artist Kei-Sing Lung. The record price shifting the character from a craze to a collectible. Now, Labubu actually belongs to Pop Mart, which is a Chinese toy maker who shot to fame in recent years after global celebrities were seen carrying its creations. Pop Mart's other characters, such as Crybaby and Dimu, have also successfully ridden on Labubu's popularity. While Labubu keychains are priced around $20 officially, it's a different story for the bigger-sized, rarer collectibles in the second-hand market, The price of a 79-centimeter tall version, for example, has climbed to almost $5,000 from an original price of around $1,400. Now, Pop Mart's share prices are consistently breaking records, and its market capitalization is now worth more than Mattel, Hasbro, and Sanrio combined. Okay, so just what makes Pop Mart's offering so attractive? CNA spoke with some fans in Shanghai.
像我这个年纪的人，就会觉得我们把钱花在吃啊、穿啊、教育啊这个上面，就是很实惠。但是其实就是你去买一个盲盒，它本身就是调整了你的情绪，它其实也是一种消费，对吧？也是一种对你有正向反馈的东西。所以我觉得现在的年轻人更多的会接受这种就是我在情感方面的投入啊，他会有这样的需求，觉得就是一种社会的变革吧。
因为盲盒的价格跟之前像奢侈品啊，或者说高端旅游啊这些的消费是没有办法相比了，它是不冲突的，是一致的，就是可能消费降级之后，大家反而就是去选择一些 affordable 的东西去买吧。所以我觉得盲盒是一个反而是大家可以选择的一个东西。对。
I don't think the brand is specifically something that we look for. It's just the overall concept of Labubu that is very cool. It's a collectible. It plays on the role of the hobby. I think it's just a very wonderful brand together with the collectible that you can have.
All right, for more, let's bring Roland back here to talk all about this Labubu craze. Quite a phenomenon. It is, it all kind of started from these mystery boxes, right, costing like maybe $20 to $30, and then now it's gone up to this six-figure auction results in under 6 years. So what's going on there?
Yeah, quite a phenomenon. Yeah, we're tracing it back to 2019 when Hong Kong artist Long Ka-sing actually teamed up with Pop Mart to create this Labubu, which is a monster series inspired by Nordic folklore and his imagination. So these rabbit-like figures you've seen, with like a mischievous grin and bunny-like ears, they're selling like hotcakes in China. You mentioned the mystery box. It's the thrill of actually, going to buy one of these, not knowing what you're going to get. And then if you don't get it, then it's going to feed into your collector mentality to try and get the one that you want. So you're going to keep buying. And with Labubu and its clever marketing, they've actually come up with limited editions, variant editions. You even have different variants for different countries. So collectors want to collect those that they haven't got in their particular country. And finally, celebrity sightings. I mean, celebrities like Rihanna, Dua Lipa, and more notably, Lisa from Blackpink. Well, they were all spotted carrying it or snapped with pictures of them with keychains and the toys, and
So it's like sort of the next it thing, to have maybe a keychain hanging around your bag. But I imagine the makers are laughing all the way to the bank. And the makers of Labubu, the founder of Pop Mart, basically, what do we know about them?
Yeah, Wang Ning founded Pop Mart back in 2010. He's now a billionaire, as you've mentioned, with the stock price of Pop Mart itself. Hails from Henan province, 37-year-old, has a degree in advertising. He founded Pop Mart in 2010, supercharged the mystery box sales system. He emphasized building relationships with well-known artists and then maintaining that strict control of scarcity of limited editions, secret variants, as well as timed drops. So you couldn't actually buy it. You'd actually have to go at a certain time to their stores to buy certain products. So he's actually driven this expansion to international markets as well. 2020, he IPO'd in Hong Kong. And then since then, he now has globally some 400 stores worldwide, including 30 in the US alone. So he's doing pretty well.
Yeah, but we have seen previous crazes, toy crazes, Bear Brick, Funko Pop. I mean, they have sort of come and then the popularity wanes. So how does Labubu compare, with these other collectibles?
Well, the pace and the scale is quite unprecedented, really, because, Bear Brick, that was introduced back in 2001. It took them nearly 20 years for one of their top collectibles, which was a collaboration with Karl Lagerfeld, the fashion designer. That only went for some $30,000 US. Labubu, as you just said, within 6-year period, it's most collectible right now, so for $150,000. So it's really unprecedented in that case. Funko Pop toys, they're more mass market collectible, and they are targeting a different tier because they have licensing agreements. They're not so much driven by the collectible aspect, i.e. limited editions that Labubu has gone. They're more like engaging the fans to create these products that they want in the market. So they're not actually making sure that these toys actually rise in speculative value.
Right. So other brands now, other cultural strategies are looking at Labubu's story. What sort of notes are they taking, on their notepad?
Well, I think they are telling, what it is telling us, the success of Labubu is that, with clever marketing, with the engagement of social media, especially with Labubu's case, it's about getting celebrity endorsements and not paying them for it. But then you get all the fans as well on social media unboxing their Labubus. That actually feeds into the frenzy. So if you have creativity and if you have a good idea and if it catches on and you're clever at marketing, I think that's going to be lessons learned for the advertising world.
Much easier said than done, though, I have to say. But I really appreciate your insights. Thanks so much for that, Roland. Well, BTS reunion fever just went up another notch today as 2 more members of the K-pop supergroup are discharged from military service. That's Jimin and Jungkook there, stepping out of the car to hordes of screaming fans. They are the 5th and 6th members of BTS to complete their mandatory military service. The only one who's still missing now is Suga, who is in public service as an alternative to military service. He will be released 10 days from now. The group has been on hiatus since 2022, but the band plans to reunite this year.
저희가 군대를 와보니까 되게 쉽지 않은 곳이었던 것 같아요. 옆에 고생하시는 분들도 너무 많고 해서 혹시 괜찮으시면은 길 지나가다가 군인분들 한번 보게 되시면은 가볍게라도 그냥 따뜻한 말이라도 해주시면은 너무 영광일 것 같습니다.
정말 저희랑 같이 이제 생활하신다고 너무 고생 많으셨고 또 잘 챙겨주셔서 너무 감사했다고 말씀드리고 싶습니다.
The boys' release has drawn fans from all over the world to South Korea. The band has a dedicated fan base who call themselves the Army.
We flew from Brazil to here just to support them and all this comeback that they're going to. Today is the discharge from Jimin and Jungkook. We are so happy and proud of them. And finally they are free to be themselves and to be with us again.
Amazing star power, I have to say. On that note, it's time to wrap up East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia and find us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.